Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this interview by Core Recruitment. Thank you all very much for joining us today. Now, International Women's Day is something which is very close to our heart at Core Recruitment, and we do lots of activities with interviews and webinars and workshops and all of that side of things. And we're really lucky to be today to be joined by Stephanie Hamilton, who's going to give us a little bit about herself, her background, and a little bit about her take on International Women's Day as well. Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Krishnan. How are you?
I'm very, very good indeed. We're recording this on Teams as opposed to recording it on the normal thing that we use, which is Zoom. So Stephanie might slightly mock me for my complete technical ineptitude throughout this whole thing. But every day is an opportunity for a growing experience, and that's really important. Stephanie, for those that don't know you, can you give us a little bit about your background and where you are now?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a qualified chef. Passion for food, and then worked in operational management in both hotels and contract catering. Moved through that into now I'm a chief HR officer for Serco. So I've been with Serco since October. So very much always about people, agenda and talent and teams. So that's followed me through my hospitality career into my HR career.
Excellent. And when I first met you, you were working in operations, obviously, and then you moved over to ISS. What was the reason for kind of like making that transition from kind of the operations side of things to HR?
I'm glad you didn't say how long ago, Krishnan, because we might both feel a bit old. Yeah, I think it was my organisation actually that spotted a behaviour that I have with people and kind of suggested a HR move. And at the time I was thinking, I didn't see myself as a HR professional, more an operational person who just really, really loved getting the best out of people. I love it when people do really well. I'm one of those people who cheerlead others and put people together to do good work. So, but actually after it was suggested to me and I moved into that headspace, I've really found my niche now, and this is exactly where I belong, bringing kind of people together and being part of their story in a small way, and feeling really privileged to do that and watch them do really good things. I'm really passionate about that. I've got a massive piece of DNA in me about being fair, so fairness is a really big deal to me. And so this role kind of suits that, because I can kind of sniff out unfairness and fairness and make sure people are treated well. So that's really important to me.
Absolutely. And just for those that don't know or might be outside of sector, just to give a bit of an idea in terms of size and scale, because these are massive organisations, right?
Yeah, so in ISS we had 34,000 employees across the UK and Ireland, and then here in Serco, so I look after a division now that's UK and Europe, and we have circa 30,000 employees covering a wide range of services which service public sector communities. So really vast array of roles, from looking at environmental services to going and looking at a prison, to looking at space, to looking at defence, to looking at trains and transport. So a real varied selection of services that we provide to citizens across the UK and across Europe too.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for taking the time out to speak to me. It sounds like a very busy job. So in terms of International Women's Day, can you tell us a bit about what it means to you?
Yeah, it's a big deal to me. I've got a daughter, she's 13. So, and I think through having my daughter, I had a moment really when she was quite young. She was playing Lego, and I kind of went through the front door, a busy day travelling. I kicked my shoes off at the door and said, "What are you doing?" Kind of got on the carpet with her. And she was playing a Lego as a restaurant. She said, "You be the chef and I'll be the server." And the chef was a man and the server was a woman. And I was really surprised that straight away she'd assumed that. And I said, "Freya," which is my daughter's name, "why is the chef a man?" And she said, "Well, chefs are men. And servers are women." And I thought, how's this happened in my house? So I was like, whoa, let's just like put the Lego down. So we had a massive conversation about why she thought that. And then also we then went on to other jobs. There was a vet, a man or a woman's job, is a head teacher, a man or a woman's job. And what was interesting to me is her role models of what she'd seen. So I was hanging around with chefs who were largely male. She was seeing people within her life, and she was actually thinking that that's how gender stereotypes were. So we busted those myths quite quickly. And since then, I'll definitely say it's taken on a different connotation, much wider than just a day. It's made me really consider, actually, I know this year is about bias, and really focusing on bias, and I can actually see that. So it's taken on a much wider connotation for me, which is around making sure that we're showing positive role models all the time, and actually we're busting a few myths. Where, you know, I would never consider I'd have a house. My home would be a place where she would see gender stereotype, but actually all her head teachers had been male at that point, so she didn't even know you could be a female head teacher. She
Wow.
does now. So it got me to think about things in a totally different way, and also widened our literature of what we were reading at that time at home. So we moved on from aliens wear underpants to all different things that actually focus a little bit more on role modelling. She was fairly young, but we still talk about that. And it was a massive learning for me. If it can happen in your home under your nose, it can happen anywhere.
100%, 100%. Now, regarding the hot topic of pay, there's been lots of legislation, there's been lots of initiatives, lots of businesses have done lots around this topic. But I mean, I work in recruitment, and I know, like, you know, we definitely have not achieved parity when it comes to pay. Why do you think that is, and what can be done about that?
Yeah, I suppose, first of all, we're a microcosm of society, aren't we? So we know there's inequality out there in society that we live with. So I don't know if you've heard of this kind of concept of something called gender fatigue, where kind of women are tired of almost, you know, where we've had these issues of personal safety, or we've had issues in society, and we've always kind of had the, you know, women need to not walk home on their own, or women need to do X, Y, and Z, almost modify our behaviour, because actually that would fix some of these inequalities that are going on. So I think it's about pay, but it's about inequality in general. So this gender fatigue is a really interesting concept that it resonates at sometimes, because you think, do you know what, I'm so tired of kind of explaining why this isn't the right thing to do, and there's better ways of doing things. So I think there's a couple of things. I think there's a little bit around, actually, it's improving. So the FTSE information came out only this morning, so yesterday, depending on when this goes out, but there was 700 new people, 700 new women in leadership roles, but it's a rise of 2%. So you can see, actually, what happens is the parity is affected by the reporting, and the fact that we've just got to get some women in more senior roles and actually apply those pay percentages in a more appropriate manner. So I think there's a lot going on in society as a general, and that plays part of that. It's not just a pay thing for me, it's an equality thing all over the place. But yeah, I'd definitely say, if people haven't heard about gender fatigue, and there's people leading organisations maybe listening into our conversation today, it's worth looking into and considering, actually, are you getting into a state where people are explaining things, or explaining why there's a gender pay gap, rather than fixing it. But I think in general it's because we need more senior women in more senior jobs. We need to be really transparent about reporting and close those gaps. And we also need to be aware of where those gaps are in particular skill sets, potentially, and do something about it.
100%. Now, if you were a senior female working within an organisation, or senior male for that matter, working within an organisation, and you maybe weren't sure what your salary level should be, or what it shouldn't be, I mean, it's quite an extreme thing to go to a recruitment agency to register just to know what your work is, if you know what I mean. But, you know, what tools can you use? Where can you find this information out? What would you recommend that people do?
Yeah, now you haven't fed me this line, but it feels like you have. I love I know you haven't, so we just have to be transparent. I love your salary tracker, so I know that that's on your landing page of your website, and I love that. So you have not asked me to say that. I'm not sponsored, I haven't got an Apple anywhere. But I think it's an absolutely brilliant piece of kit, and I actually advise people to go onto that. Genuinely, I've never told you that, and I definitely don't want anyone to think we set this up, but I think it's brilliant. And the way that you land it on your page is really cool. So I just think that's really good. I think there's two things. So one is feel empowered to ask the question, am I a statistic? So have I got parity here? But secondly, there is data out there. You must read your own organisation's gender pay gap report. You must read it. You must look at where you are in those bandings. You must look at what organisation you're either working for or going to work for. Look at what they're doing about it. Feel that there's more than, you know, a badge or an annual report, and doing something about it, and then go and work for those people. It's very easy to find information, and we've got to arm ourselves with knowledge. Knowledge is power, in my opinion. Load ourselves up with this knowledge and then go and use it. But I would definitely do three things. Read the organisation you're going to or you currently work for, read their gender pay report, and then challenge them on it if you think it's not right, or you're not seeing their actions that are declared in the report in the DNA of the culture. Secondly, use a salary tracker. And thirdly, if you think there's something wrong or unfair, call it out. Always call it out.
100%, 100%. Now, what advice would you give to kind of like, you know, younger female leaders who are building their confidence and they're maybe starting off and they're trying to hone their skills as a future leader?
Yeah, I think I used to, I'm not doing this at the moment because I'm new in my organisation, but I used to mentor quite a few graduates, and I'd go into the room of men. This is not made up, this is true. I'd go in the room of men and they would tell me that they wanted to be, how long could it take them to be the chief exec? They were thinking about 18 months, but they were wondering what I was thinking. These are people fresh out of university. Then I'd go into a group of the women and they would say, we thought we'd start off by a supervisor, then a manager, and then kind of, you know, 10 years later be on some kind of director manager path. Now, I'm not saying 18 months is fast track to chief exec is the right option, but there was this distinct difference between the female room thinking, I need to know everything about a job, and when I'm 100% secure, I'll move to the next one. And the guys saying, actually, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to not worry about what I don't know and learn it on the job, and I'm on the fly. And this isn't to illustrate anything other than this was an actual conversation I had. And I remember for the females, they were drawing it on a piece of paper, and I leant over and ripped the paper in half and said, girls, the room next door, they haven't even got a piece of paper. Let me tell you what they're talking about, how I get them to be chief exec. And you're asking me how do I get you to be a supervisor? Come on. So I think there's two things. Firstly, the first thing is focus on what you're good at, not what you don't know. So many times people worry about the stuff they don't know. Focus on what you're good at and major on that really big. So you really focus on the stuff that the value that you bring. Secondly, get out of your comfort zone and be really clear that you can be out of your comfort zone and be comfortable. And thirdly, most importantly, I think get a good collection of people around you who you trust, who would give you some good advice, and encourage them to kind of boost your confidence and go for it. And I think those things combined can really make a difference.
Absolutely, 100%. Flashing back to the question before, and it just was something that I was kind of visualizing, but when people, regarding the pay side of things specifically, if somebody is kind of like setting up that chat with their boss or their chat with HR or something like that, I think a lot of the time people can feel like they're maybe being too demanding, or maybe creating problems for themselves, or perhaps people are going to view me differently, or how am I going to be perceived when I do this? You know, with, you know, those groups specifically of females that you've been dealing with, what advice would you give them in terms of like how to position it with themselves?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things really. First is to be open to the fact that you're going to enter a conversation where you might not like the outcome. So you've got to be realistic, because I think if you go into a negotiation, which is what this is, and you might not like the outcome, you've got to be prepared for that. So I'm not going to be here selling all unicorns and rainbows that it's all going to be, you know, you go in, you ask for some money and they go, of course, here's the money. Why didn't you ask before? And here's a bit more. So be really clear when you go into the conversation, you might not get what you want, and it might be a hard conversation that can hurt you. So you've got to be really robust and really control of the fact that that might happen. And then I would do two things really. If you think there's something unjust, it can be an easy conversation around, I'm really keen to progress through the salary banding. Can we have a development conversation about what skills you think I'm missing that actually would allow me to climb through that banding? So what behaviours are you not seeing, or what do you want to see? And that can be a development conversation if you're in that area of your career that thinks, actually, I want to crack on, but I'm not really sure on what area. So be quite targeted. Then follow up with an email. Be smart. So have targets that you can achieve. Be realistic. And then when you've done it, go back and say, remember, this is the progress I'm making. This is what we said it would get for me. This is what the organisation would got. I'm achieved that. Where are we? So just like follow it through like a project, a piece of work, and invest in yourself. If you think you're underpaid from a market perspective, you've got to go in with some data.
Yeah.
So you have to use data to do that. So I would say treat it as a classic business negotiation. Be ready when you go into that room that you might hear some stuff you don't want to hear. So, you know, be quite robust around that. If you're a data driven, get your data set. If it's a developmental issue, then make sure you're clear on what that is, when the end date is, and what you expect when you've done it, and then go and ask for it.
100%, really good advice. Now, in terms of businesses, what should companies be investing in to promote women in leadership and just generally to create an inclusive workspace?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things really. You would expect me to say great processes and systems. So policies that support really good flexible working, parental leave, policies that support an ability for someone to bring their whole self to work and whatever that looks like. So I think, but that's pretty obvious for me. I think I would expect people to invest in making sure that they've got good training, so diversity and inclusion training, unconscious bias training. But I would also expect that they take either male leaders, particularly if it's a female thing, on actually thinking, can you amplify voices? Is there a way of actually ensuring that when people don't walk into the room, that someone automatically thinks the female's going to take notes? That they feel like old-fashioned things, but from time to time on committees, you do see this kind of behaviour where it kind of swings round to someone who you think actually anyone can take the notes. It doesn't have to be the female. So I would say all the normal things you would expect me to say around policies, processes and training, but actually in induction and in leadership call-out meetings, it's about saying your role and responsibility as this is amplify the underrepresented voices around the table. And in my experience, that's usually women. So everyone's got a role to amplify those voices.
Absolutely. Is there a particular leader or figure who you look up to, Stephanie?
I wouldn't say I'm a famous leader or person. I suppose there's a couple of people. So I really like what Simone Roche does in terms of the power. She does power women and level up, and she does loads of stuff with young talent. And I really like what she's doing in that space. So you can see her all over LinkedIn. She's really encouraging the next generation of leaders through, and I love her work. But in general, I get my inspiration from females who are doing something different, who are finding their way, not because they're doing anything cutting edge, like, sailing around the world or doing anything like that, but it's the women who are quietly going about their stuff and nailing it. You kind of walk in, or you're in a meeting. I've listened to the other recordings that you've done, and I listened to the lady from Girls, and I loved her. For me, I'm a cheerleader of all women, and it's about hearing other people's stories and thinking, do you know what? I'm really happy that you went and did that. I'm a person who will stop someone and tell them they've got nice hair, nice shoes. I like the way they've spoken about something. I want to tap them on the shoulders, and we can think, well, actually, it's a bit shallow. Of course it's not. It's like a sisterhood that we exist in, and you'll find me usually somewhere cheering someone on, and I spot the good in people and I call that out. So I'm not necessarily a famous leader, more a collection of women who are doing really good stuff. I think Katie Nichols did a fantastic a cheerleading approach for the whole of hospitality during lockdown, and I couldn't have liked or followed her on Twitter any more than I did to tell her, and I tweeted her on many occasions to just say, I think you're unbelievable. And I just thought she did a really good job. So I'm someone who spots people doing good work, and I tap them on the top shoulder and I tell them I think they're amazing, and they kind of think, well, you're a weirdo. And sure.
I'm sure they appreciate the feedback, but I completely agree with you. Kate Nichols is absolutely a force of nature. She's amazing. So if you could go back, I guess, to kind of like, you know, yourself when you were in chef school, when you were training, and you could, I mean, you've done phenomenally well anyway, Stephanie, but I mean, if you could go back and give yourself kind of like any piece of advice to stop yourself running into some walls or avoid some kind of heartache or some situations, what would you go back and tell yourself?
Oh, yeah, two things really. I'm 50, so this is a true story, when I was training at chef school, you couldn't buy a maternity chef's jacket. You had to wear a man's. So I wasn't pregnant during that time.
Wow.
And it was so normal, like you couldn't buy one, like you couldn't, they were not made, you couldn't buy one. And when I remembered talking about that to my lecturer, and he said, well, you can't chef when you're pregnant anyway, because you couldn't reach the cooker, is what he said, like the stove. And I remember at the time thinking, that seems completely reasonable because it's hot, of course you can't. And I remember thinking that was a completely normal. And then obviously as time goes on and you can buy chef's jackets that are, and I think largely you also said you'll end up being a pastry chef anyway, so what you're worried about, because always the women with the pastry chef. So, and I was so accepting of some of that conversation. I now look at that and think, I would have had a word with myself to say, hang on a minute, that's not quite right. And then I also remember really visceral, it was really emotional that I bought someone a maternity chef's jacket who was a chef working for me, who was pregnant. And it was a really big deal because I could buy one and she could continue to work, and she wasn't a pastry chef. And I remember handing it to her and being quite emotional about it. And she was kind of in her 20s, and she thought, all right, old lady, this isn't a big deal. What's your problem? But to me, it was a really big moment. And I think if I can say anything, there isn't any barriers. There isn't any barriers other than the ones that people might put in your way. And actually just go knock them down. And that's definitely what I tell my 13-year-old daughter. If you can dream it, you can be it. Because sometimes you can't. I'm a big believer, if you can see it, you can be it. But sometimes you can't always see it. So if you can dream it, you can be it. And I'll back you all the way. And I think I didn't know that back then, but I know that now. And I've got a soapbox about telling other people that, like, just go for it. What's the worst that can happen? Just go for it.
That's amazing. Stephanie, thank you so much for taking the time out to speak to me today. It's been really, really, really great to have a proper chat with you about this. And I'm sure lots of people are going to watch this and get a little bit of inspiration for their days about, and hopefully their salary reviews as well, because that's something we've really got to work on to move things forward. But thank you so much.
Oh, no, take care. Lovely to see you. Take care. See you. Bye.